Main screen turn on. All your bass are belong to us. There we go. Oh, backpack. Let's move that. There we go. All your base are belong to us. Welcome, chat. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Boston. Just a reminder that everything we discuss on stream today is intended to be for educational purposes only. Nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. So if y'all have a concern or question that is medical in nature, please go see a licensed professional. Alrighty. Plants are being rehabbed. So I think that they weren't getting enough sunlight in here, which I know looks kind of shocking given how much that is bare. But so I think they needed to be, so they're in a different room. And we'll see if we can get some plants that are a little bit more conducive to the level of sunlight that we have here. Yeah, so is something going on with our place? What's going on with place? Chat, fill me in. So, couple of announcements while we're figuring out what's going on with place. I have a icon. Do we have an HG thing somewhere? I don't know. Do y'all want to put something somewhere? That's what she said. Is a pixel war. Yeah, so let me just run through a couple of announcements. So this month on our Discord, we're gonna have like April month of meditation, which starts today actually. So these we're gonna be practicing meditation together on Discord. A lot of these are gonna be themes from week to week. So they're based on some of the meditations we have in the guide. So week 1 is grounding meditations. Week 2 is focusing meditations. Week 3 is open awareness meditations. Week 4 is inquisitive meditations. So we have different kinds of meditation. So if y'all are interested in buffing up your practice, getting involved with meditation, this is exactly the kind of thing that we do on Discord. So we also have apparently pre-recorded guided meditations that are going to be running throughout the day via the Healthy Gamer bot. So that's pretty cool. And the thing is that we only have a few group coaching spots left. So if y'all are interested in group coaching, go ahead and sign up. So check 1813 316. Okay, let me figure that out. Let's take a look at how do we see oh, there we go. 8. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can do this with y'all. Let's find. So where are we going? Click on the banner of place. So we're going to. How do I zoom out? Cancel. Place a tile. What is this? Okay, so we've got, so where are we going? 18, 11, and 3, 6, so 18, 11, and 316. Let's zoom in. Oh, here it is. I'm going to place a tile. Chat. This one? No, this one. Check. I placed a tile, chat. We did it. We did it. We live on in place. Oh my God, dude, I restarted playing Elden Ring recently because I took a break a while for work. But dude, speaking of, oh, look at it. Let's fill it in. That's awesome. We did it. There's another logo. Oh my God, this is so cool. Super Mega. Tabletop RPGs. This is neat. Kirby. I don't know. Who is this? And who is this? Who are these people? All right, this is cool. Okay. So, back to reality. I suppose that's reality. So, couple things. So, all right. So I'm going to just like level with y'all for a second. So I saw a scientific paper recently about DMT. and I'll share with y'all what this paper is so you guys can take a look. And I decided, like, this is going to be kind of a weird fringe topic today. So I had kind of an idea. So I want to talk to y'all about this, and then we'll see if you guys are okay with this or not. Okay? So there was recently a paper which was a naturalistic field study, which we'll talk about in a second what that means. But a lot of people ask me questions about like spiritual experiences and like psychedelics, and is meditation the same as psychedelics? Like, what's the deal here? Like, so this study basically was a naturalistic study that looked at 36 people, and 34 out of the 36 people, when they were using DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, were basically described meeting like other beings. And so there's some weird experiences I've had in meditation, largely positive. I really enjoy them. I thought they're really fantastic. There's a reason I decided that I wanted to become a monk after spending 3 months in India, because dope was hype. And so today, what I was thinking about doing towards the end is just kind of like diving into this concept. So we're going to start with a scientific paper if y'all are okay with it, but then we're just going to kind of have like a free form conversation about what's going on here. Like when people use meditation and they remember their past lives, and when they do DMT and they meet otherworldly beings, like what the hell is going on here? There's going to be a couple of disclaimers. It's going to be like not that scientific, because as we're going to be as scientific as we can, right? So there are some studies, so we're going to start there. There's going to be a lot of like amateur philosophy, which I'm sure that I'm out of my depth with, in terms of the nature of reality and all that kind of stuff. But I thought we'd just sort of have like an open conversation about like what is the deal with psychedelic drugs and meditation. Couple of, caveats, so we'll sort of share this again when we kind of dive into it, if you guys are okay with it, is I don't recommend the use of psychedelics. So I think that, I've had patients who have had positive experiences on psychedelics. I've had patients who have had very healing experiences on psychedelics. One of my good colleagues and friends from work, is an advocate for the use of psychedelics outside of medical things. So if y'all have seen the interview with Will Sue, for example, so like, I'm sort of familiar with this stuff. But at the same time, I've also had like tons of patients come to me because they've had bad experiences with psychedelics. I've seen relationships fall apart. I've seen people get PTSD. I've seen people develop like weird like panic attacks and anxiety disorders and stuff. So I think that, this isn't just like a protect my ass disclaimer. This is a genuine warning that I don't think that it's wise to use psychedelics. There's no control on quality and things like that. Sometimes you can get things that are laced with stuff, things like that. So you have to be really careful. So I don't advocate for their use. And the good news is that you can sort of maybe get there with meditation, which is what we're going to talk about. So if y'all are okay with this, we're going to talk about this kind of stuff. We've got a couple of posts that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So one is, I don't talk unless people talk to me. Second is, my family disapproves of who I want to be. So how to talk to your family if they don't like who you are. And then my older brother treats his friends like they are his therapist. And so the DMT paper and that discussion we'll probably do towards the end. But let's go ahead and, what was that? I heard a noise. That was weird. Okay. So what do y'all want to do first? Oh, place is telling you to place the tile. I did. I already placed the tile, didn't I? There's our. Oh, do I need to place a tile? Green. Oh, there's a cooldown. Interesting. Okay. Well, now we know. Okay, so I'm closing place. And let's go ahead and do a quick poll. What do y'all want to... Does that sound okay, chat? Are y'all cool with that? You want to see the paper? Yeah, let's... I want to get to some of these because I have a feeling that the paper will be like a weird kind of free-flowing sort of discussion. So what we're going to do is throw together a poll. Image poll. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, okay. Hold on. Someone's already doing it. Oh. Okay, no, never mind. New poll. Okay. What do first? Okay. Having trouble talking. Family disapproves of who I am. And then older brother treats his friends and treats friends. Okay, can't type that. Treating friends like therapy. Let's do it. Okay, which first? And then we'll do DMT at the end because we'll couple meditation with it. Does that sound okay, chat? Chattars? Okay, perfect. This is why we picked this one. So, I think what we're gonna do is we'll dive into having trouble talking. Okay, this is gonna be good. All right. So, let's take a look at the post. Okay, chattars? Should we get started? By the way, probably interview on Wednesday and probably interview on Friday for people who are wondering. Okay, let's dive in. So I don't talk unless people talk to me. How do I change that? I started college last week. It's a course I enjoy and the classes and professors are fun. For a while now, I was fantasizing about going back to college so I'd finally break the cycle of being 24/7 stuck at home with no human contact. And here I am, and I'm underwhelmed. I dropped out of my previous course because of depression, and mostly because I had no contact with anyone there. And I fear I'm headed to the same route now. I finally understand the problem, though, not at its root. I do not engage in any interaction with anyone unless the person does it first. I simply remain quiet, completely silent. Everyone in the class seems to be getting along, and I feel behind. I'm unable to start a conversation or let go of my inner voice that always prevents me from saying anything because it might look stupid. I know I need to break through the comfort zone, but I can't. It just does not apply in practice. I simply cannot enjoy talking to people, let alone when we don't know each other yet. I always feel like I'm bothering them when most are already in groups and I'm just there floating around. This is more of an event than anything. So this is a fantastic post. My heart goes out to this person. So this is the challenge, is that we know that we're supposed to engage with people, right? And we even want to engage with people. We feel lonely. We feel isolated. We know that human contact is important. And we also sort of hear about people breaking out of their comfort zone, right? So we sort of have this idea that I need to just get over this anxiety, or I just need to get over myself. And I just need to step outside of my comfort zone. I need to put myself out there, right? We said we hear things like this. People who don't suffer from these kinds of things will say things like this to us. They'll say, just put yourself out there, bro, girl. Just put yourself out there, right? But the problem is that we can't, because that solution works for that person because the hump that they have to get over is a lot smaller than the hump that we have to get over. Or what we end up concluding is that the hump is the same, but I'm just so much, my ability to climb is so much lower that I can't do it. And then I start to feel bad about myself, right? So this is a really common problem where people are kind of stuck in this wanting a relationship, but sort of passively waiting for it to show up. And even then, strategically, it's the wrong idea. That you should be putting yourself out there, but you can't really bring yourself to do that. So what I'd love to do today is walk through a couple of things with y'all, okay? The first is, what the hell is going on in your mind? How does this work, right? What happens in our mind? Why does our mind prevent us? Because that's actually what it's doing, right? Because you want to make connections with other people. Why does our mind prevent us from reaching out to other people, speaking up? What are some of the mechanisms that go on in the mind that keep us from engaging with other people? How can we understand those? And then we're also going to introduce you to a couple of cognitive things that you can do. This sort of draws on basically exposure therapy to sort of think a little bit about what that hump is and how you can reduce that hump to position yourself to re-engage with people socially, okay? So we're going to start by understanding, okay, what's going on in the mind. So the first thing that y'all have to understand is that when we are inexperienced with something, our mind is going to fill it in with possibilities. And because the mind fills it in with possibilities and has no experience, it has no way of assigning probability to the possibility. So if I've never, gone swimming before, my mind is naturally going to fill it in with like all kinds of stuff could happen if I go swimming. And generally speaking, if we have an anxious temperament, depending on what kind of samskars we have, depending on our 5-factor personality level, like if we're high on neuroticism, the things that my mind tends to fill it in with tend to be negative, right? Because that's how the mind works. So our brain has evolved to sort of assume the worst. They're like safe things, which we all do, and then they're like things that we tend to not do too much. So if we look at people who are explorers, right? Explorers are like the smaller section of our population. Most of the people that have existed didn't board a boat and just see what's out there. So generally speaking, exploration is discouraged in some ways by the mind, unless it's a very safe way to do it. And generally speaking, when there's an unknown, our mind fills it in with the most negative possibilities. And why is that? It's to try to protect us. Right? Because if we don't know what's going to happen, think about all the things that are going to go wrong. We know if we don't talk to anyone, sure, we're going to be kind of miserable, but at least we'll be safe. And what the mind prioritizes more than anything else, and I think this is evolutionary as well, is safety, right? So it's like the body, the brain, the mind prioritizes safety. This is why, for example, if you look at your favorite restaurant, so let's say you go to a restaurant, you eat there 20 times and you love the food every single time. If you get food sickness or food poisoning once, the 21st time you go out to eat, you get food poisoning, what's going to happen? You're not going to want to eat there again, right? So our brain is actually biased. It doesn't say, oh, by the way, we're going to get food poisoning 5% of the time. It doesn't make a probabilistic calculation. That's not how the mind works. The mind works by single things that are very negative have a larger weight in our experience and our behavioral calculations than all of the positive stuff. Right. So a simple way to think about it is, let's say I've been married for 20 years and I find out my partner has been having an affair for the last 6 months. That's the kind of thing where it's you can still have 20 years of good marriage. And if you discover an affair that's been lasting for 6 months, it kind of wipes away all the good with a couple of bad things, or maybe not a couple. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm not trying to place a value judgment. I'm simply pointing out that there's a mechanism of mind that one bad experience is way stronger than a pile of good experiences. So that's a bias that our brain has. So when we get socially kind of anxious, we don't talk to anyone, that tends to be because our mind is imagining all this bad stuff. So let's take a quick look at this post, right? So let's look at this. So breaking the cycle, because I have no contact with anyone, I fear I'm headed down the same route. Everyone in class seems to be getting along and I feel behind, right? So that's where we start to think oh my God, I'm kind of like a loser. We start to have negative identity thoughts about ourselves. My inner voice that always prevents me from saying anything because it might look stupid. There it is, right? So what is that inner voice actually telling you? The inner voice is trying to protect you. It's saying, hey, this is unsafe. Don't do it. I know I need to break through the comfort zone, but I can't. It's not a comfort zone, it's safety zone. And I cannot, it doesn't apply in practice. I always feel like I'm bothering them most when most groups are already there and I'm just floating around, right? So all of these negative thoughts kind of come up and they start to get in the way of us actually doing things. So let's take a quick look at how we sort of tackle this problem, okay? So can't initiate conversation. So here's you. Here's the activation energy to initiate a conversation, okay? That looks, make it straighter. I'm at an angle. Oh, no. Okay. So here's the activation energy. So in order to engage in something, for those of y'all that are familiar with like chemical reactions and stuff, there's this idea of an activation energy, right? And actually, if we want to be legitimate around chemical stuff. This is actually what the curve should look like, right? So we start here and we end up lower. So moving from a high energy state to a low energy state. So this is the gap that we have to overcome in order to initiate the behavior. So let's try to understand what that gap is. So for our friends who say, oh, just put yourself out there, their gap is going to be like smaller. Okay. So like when they say, oh, like just put yourself out there, their gap is like this, right? That's why it feels easy to them. And they're like, oh, like, sure, there's some activation energy. I know exactly what you're talking about. There's an activation energy for me too. You just have to get over it. But what we face and what they face is a little bit different. So let's try to understand what are the components of this hump that we have to go over, okay? So even if we look back at our post, what we're going to sort of find is that there's a lack of experience. And in that lack of experience, we're going to have doomsday scenarios, right? And this in turn makes us want to be safe. So it's actually a feeling of safety here, okay? Next thing to kind of consider is there's an identity component, right? Other people are social, but when we start to say things like fallen behind, if y'all have been paying attention to our content and watching and stuff like that, you recognize that this is a comparison. A comparison is born of the ego or the ahamkar, and this in turn is an identity issue. Do y'all see that? So it's like you can chain this stuff very easily, right? And so then there are also like some of these doomsday scenarios, like we'll talk kind of more specifically here, but there's this idea that I'm bothering people. There's also the concern that I'll look like an idiot. So how do we overcome this stuff, right? So there are a couple of different things that we can do to lower this activation energy. The first thing is that as we sort of deal with some of these things, as we address these issues, it should lower the activation energy. So even in something like exposure therapy, so let's talk about exposure therapy for a second. What's the principle behind exposure therapy? Okay. So the principle behind exposure therapy is that what we want to do is like give you more data points. So let's say that I have one data point. I eat at a restaurant once and I get sick. Right? I just have one data point, and that data point is sickness. And therefore, I'm not going to engage in the behavior because like I had a really bad experience, right? So let's use a kind of a better example. So let's talk about exposure therapy of like a phobia of, let's say, dogs. Okay, so I was bitten by a dog when I was a kid, and I got terrified, and so now I'm scared of dogs. So anytime that we have a hypothetical encounter with a dog, what our safety circuit fills it in with is negative possibilities, right? All we have is these negative possibilities. And really all we have is let's call it one actual negative experience. So this is our negative experience, okay? But then we have all these negative possibilities that we're kind of like filling it in with. So the goal of exposure therapy is to try to have these kind of neutral sort of experiences that we're going to fill it in with. And then what happens is like the balance will start to change, right? It won't be all negative. So the way that exposure therapy will work is what we're going to want to do is we're going to sort of think about a dog. And this works physiologically, okay? So when I think about a dog, when a patient is sitting in my office and I tell them, think about a dog, what starts to happen? They have a sympathetic nervous system reaction. So what does this mean? This means adrenaline, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, diaphoresis, sweating, right? Tachypnea. That's elevated respiratory rate, hyperventilation. We have all these kinds of physiologic things. And then what happens is the brain gets this exposure of thinking about a dog, has this physiologic reaction, and then nothing happens. So then the brain is like, I thought we were in danger. Okay, so there's no reinforcement of the danger. And then when they come back next week, we're going to think about the dog again. okay? We're just thinking about the dog. But this time, there's a little bit less sympathetic reaction because we thought about the dog and nothing bad happened. So our body's like, okay, not that big of a deal. Maybe I don't need to freak out as much. Then what we're going to do is we're going to elevate the exposure. Then we're going to look at pictures of dogs. And now instead of just thought, what we're adding is actually like a sensory organ sort of activation. And then we're going to go sit on a park bench or maybe go sit inside a coffee shop. That'll probably be safer. Look outside at dogs playing, but there's a wall of glass, right? And then so what happens is like this is going to increase our sympathetic nervous system, right? So we're going to get that reaction. And then like the more we sort of, what we're gradually going to do is then we're going to go sit on a park bench. And then that person, like the patient is going to have a rapid heart rate. They're going to be like freaking out, right? They're outside of their comfort zone. So like what we gradually do is we get like closer and closer to like encountering a dog, but we do it sort of in a safe manner. Okay. So, and then what happens is like, remember that the mind has no experience or it has a limited experience. And so by adding a lot of other data points that are benign, we make it easier to engage in the task. Does that make sense? Can you do this with women? Absolutely, you can do this with women. Okay? We're going to talk about, I mean, I hope that's okay to say. What I mean by that, I don't know if you're a man or a woman, but you can do this with social interactions. Let's call it that way. Let's say that, okay? So let's talk a little bit about how to actually do this. So the goal here is that we want to have an increase in benign social interactions. So there are 4 things that we can do, 4 things that we can focus on to make it easy, okay? When we'll talk, I may have opened a can of worms by answering a question from chat, but we'll get to that in a second, okay? I'll try to fix that and hopefully not offend people. So let's kind of focus on the core principles. So increase in benign social interactions, that's our goal. So what we want to think about, first of all, is what will the social interaction be? Okay, we want to lay that out. And that's usually where people stop, right? So when people are like, oh, I just need to do this. So they just think about the action and then they stop there. They don't explore any of the resistance that their mind will come across. The second thing that we need to look at is self-image. What will people think? So I would recommend concretely asking yourself. So let's start small, right? So what we're going to do is say hello to the person next to you in class. Next to you. And then we have to get more specific than this because what does hello mean? Right? So when I'm actually working with patients, what we need to do is be concrete. So what we're going to say is, hey, how are you today? That's what we're actually going to say. So what feels natural? So think through actually what you're going to say. Is it going to be hello? Or is it going to be hello? Right? So is it going to be a Elder Scrolls NPC? Or is it going to be, hey, how are you today? You know, like what are you actually going to say? What feels comfortable? So you have to think through that a little bit. And even as you're thinking through it, what are you going to get? You're going to get a sympathetic reaction. Okay? Or you could say, howdy, hello, citizen. Right? Have you heard of the Thalmor? The glory of the Thalmor? Is that hello, traveler? Right? So don't say zug zug because we're going to get into problems with self-image. So then you got to think a little bit about how are they going to perceive you if you say, hey, how you doing? Because what happens is in the absence of this structured cognitive exploration, your mind is going to fill it in with like random negative things. They're going to think I'm a complete creep. No, they're not, right? So if you really like think about it logically and you engage with your mind, you may feel that way. You may feel awkward, but what are they actually going to think? If you say, hey, how you doing today? Right? So just think through it, grapple with it. And this is where some ego stuff is going to come up. So like, how are they going to think about you? And then just think through that a little bit. So your mind may start with saying they're going to think you're a complete idiot, and then just sort of question that and be like, ask yourself, if someone walked up to me and said, hey, how are you doing today? And I was sitting next to them. Maybe if they walked up to me on the street, it would be weird. But if they're sitting next to me and they said, hey, how are you doing today? Does that really bother me? No, it doesn't really bother me. So think through that. Next thing that we want to do is think through the consequences of taking action. So what is actually going to happen? So we want to think about what the interaction is going to be. We want to think about, what people are how will people view me? So you want to think through self-image. And then you want to think about what are the actual consequences? What are people going to do if I say, hey, how are you today? And it's not going to be like, oh, they're going to stop showing up at class because I said hello to them. That's not going to happen, right? Whereas in a non-structured cognitive way, if you let your mind run wild, it'll actually think thoughts like that, right? It'll think they're going to feel so inconvenienced by me. But if we really think about it, the reason that you think other people are going to be inconvenienced by you comes from you. It doesn't come from them, right? It comes from your own idea, your self-image, that you are a burden to other people. So that's where the ego component comes in. So think through the actual consequence. Then what we want to do is anticipate internal challenges. So if I were to stop there and say, go say hi to someone the next time you're in class, not good enough, because you've thought through all this stuff, right? But what's the one thing that you haven't accounted for is your own mind and how it's going to wreck you if you try. So what is my mind going to do? This is the next very important question you need to ask yourself, right? What is going to happen? Okay, I'm going to feel sweaty, right? I'm going to feel awkward. I'm going to feel bothersome. And then kind of think through a little bit, okay, what could I say or what could I do that would make me feel less of these things? Even if I felt this way, what could I get away with, right? What could I convince myself or push myself to do? Because what you may discover is that, something like this is going to make you feel so awkward and so uncomfortable that, it's too much to handle. So then maybe what you need to do is downplay what you kind of do. So maybe there are all kinds of modifications you can make. So you have to remember that instead of trying to overcome yourself, so this is what tends to happen is we try to overcome ourselves and then we create internal conflict in the mind. When we create internal conflict in the mind, that does not increase our relaxation. It increases tension in the mind, ramps up our internal energy, and the more that our energy is ramped up and the less relaxed we are, the more it boosts our anxiety. So if y'all have seen Dr. K's Guide to Anxiety, you sort of know this with rebound anxiety, which is this problem where people run into this issue where they overcome their anxiety, right? They're like, oh, I dug deep and I overcame, I went to a job interview. I did it. And then what happens the next day? Does the anxiety go away? No, it comes roaring back, right? So what you have to do is work with yourself instead of trying to overcome yourself, because the part of you that feels unsafe is going to come roaring back, okay? You can sort of bludgeon it into submission with enough time. So if you create enough experience, that can get better. But generally speaking, what we want to do is work with ourselves, right? So if there's a part of you that's that's too much, I can't handle that, then be like, okay, so what can I handle? So maybe this is something as simple as sit in the same chair twice with someone else, the same person sitting next to you. So sit next to this person 3 days in a row. You're not sitting next to the person, you're just sitting in the same chair. Because in my head, in my anxious head, I'm so afraid that people are going to think that I'm trying to sit next to them that I keep on moving around, right? I create all of these ways in my head that I inconvenience the rest of the world. And then what I try to do is stop inconveniencing the rest of the world in my head. So I start sitting in 1,000 different places. And then I'm sort of doing everyone a favor by not sitting next to them, right? So you need to think through your own internal challenges that are going to arise and prepare for them. Once you do that, then you actually want to take the action, right? So and this is where what I'd recommend is if you're really in a school situation, it's not sufficient to sit, to say hello, or like, that's not enough. Like, you need to do more. And don't worry, it's not going to be bad. So what I'd recommend if you're kind of socially anxious is that you find other scenarios, because let's say that you have a class that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you say hello on Monday and then on Tuesday, you're just anxious all day, it's going to be harder to do it on Wednesday where you say hello. And then you felt so awkward that you're anxious all day. And then on Friday, you manage to say hello, but your voice cracks because you rile yourself up. And then you're traumatized going into the weekend. And then Monday rolls around. And yeah, we're done with that. Your mind is like, yeah, we're done with that. So this is another common mistake that people make, is that like they think, oh, I've tried this, it doesn't work. And they're not wrong, right? Like, they're not wrong. This is your experience. The question is, why is that your experience? The question is, how can you change it? So what I'd recommend if you've been socially isolated is that you ramp up your activity and you mortify people in different situations. So even on Monday, we're going to say, hey, how are you? But then on Monday afternoon, when we go to the grocery store, we're going to we're going to say thank you to the person, the cashier, right? If the waiter, let's say you go out to eat with some of your close friends who you can socialize with, you're going to ask them, what's good here? And then you're going to feel super awkward, right? What are the internal challenges? The waiter is like, oh yeah, the sandwiches are really good here. But you don't want to eat a sandwich. Then what do? You're screwed. Because the waiter said the sandwiches are good and I'm not going to order a sandwich. Then why the hell did I even ask if I'm not going to follow their recommendation? So think about these things, right? It's okay. Right? So it's okay. So like, you're going to ask for the recommendation. And then if you really want to, oh, thanks for recommending, I'm not feeling a sandwich today. So you're going to prepare. Okay, thanks for the recommendation, not really up my alley. Or if you want to go like, super Chad mode, you can even say like, I know it's super bizarre. I asked you for a recommendation. Now I feel like an idiot ordering something else. You can even joke if you want to and go meta with them, right? Y'all get that? Like, you just say, like, I've done that before because I feel like an idiot asking and then, not ordering what they say. And like, they don't care. Like, they're not going to lose sleep over it tonight. You may lose sleep over it tonight. But you can just offer a small explanation if you want to. You can say like, oh, like, thanks for the recommendation. You know what? This salad sounds amazing. I think I'm going to try that. It's not that big of a deal. Feels like that big of a deal. So you need to think about multiple interactions. We want to actually kind of pace them up, right? So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to say hello to people that we sit next to. We may even ramp up a little bit. We're going to say, hello, how are you? Friday, you can ask, oh yeah, have you like tried the homework yet? Right? You can sort of ask that. Monday, you can, by the way, I never got a chance to introduce myself. Easy. So this is another, like, there are techniques you can use. So I don't know if y'all have ever gotten to this kind of social anxiety trap, which is that I've been making small talk with this person and like, I don't know their name and they don't know my name. So now I don't know how to interact with them because I feel like I should know their name. And it's been 2 weeks and now we're like GG. So then like, you're like, I don't know how to ask this person their name because it's too late now. So I guess I'll go sit on the other side of the room and just, never speak to them again. Right? And so then, you don't want to walk up to them and say like, hey, you're an NPC, so I don't know your name. No, you want to say, hey, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. Right? And you can say, didn't get a chance. And how are they going to feel when you say that? They're going to feel relieved because they don't know your name either. Because y'all never introduced yourselves. You just started talking. And they're like, oh, thank God. Because every week they're coming into the class. They're like, oh, fuck, that guy's going to sit next to me again. And I don't remember his name. I don't remember his name. Right? Like, They're going to be relieved. Oh, by the way, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. Or if I did introduce myself, I'm sorry. I didn't catch your name. It slipped my mind. Can you please remind me, what was your name again? Whatever feels comfortable. So I personally, I keep track of this kind of stuff. So I'll say like, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. Hi, my name is, and then you can kind of do that, right? And so if you have these other kinds of social interactions, remember what we're doing. Here's our vacuum of experience, of human experience, that our social anxiety is filling in with doomsday scenarios, right? And so when we have a waiter conversation, it's over here. Not even conversation. We say hi to the waiter. We thank the cashier. We say hi to someone in class. There are other things that you can just like whatever opportunities you have for brief social interactions, like very, very brief social interactions, right? Like if you're waiting on the bus, you can just like nod to someone. Like don't make it weird gender wise. You can just like nod to someone. So like I'm a big fan of the bro nod, right? Depending on what you're into, you can do the down nod or the up nod. So it could be like like I acknowledge you. I see you as a human and you're a good person, right? And so that's kind of, that may be a bit much for other people, but whatever you feel good with. Cashiers, grocery stores, family members, like whatever you feel comfortable with. And you want to try to pack in as much mild social interaction as you can within 1 week. Okay? Like, don't just do like one thing every 48 hours. Like, try to have small things with people who will never talk to each other. So they can't, because here's the thing. Oh my God, like, you won't believe the weirdest person talked to me at the bus stop. Oh, that guy's, I took a picture of him. He's in my class. Oh, and then the rest of the world is conspiring and talking about you behind your back about how socially awkward you are. And then they go to a party and their friend is the cashier from the grocery store and their friend is also and his roommate is the waiter, and all four of them are going to talk. And they're going to realize there's oh man, I met the most awkward fucker. This guy came to my restaurant today and asked me what was good. I told him a sandwich. This asshole ordered a salad. Here, I got a copy of the security footage and we can compare to the picture of the guy that, that's not going to happen. Right? Y'all get that? That's just not going to happen. But that's what your mind does. And why does it do that? It's because it's got nothing else to fill it in with. Y'all get that? There's none of this over here. It's all gone. So then what happens? What happens with social anxiety? This is what happens with social anxiety. I don't know if you guys know this. This is what happens. Nightmare scenarios. And they're like, oh my God. And then it becomes this whole big thing in your head. And then this is where the hump comes from. Right? So by having these mild social interactions, what tends to happen is this. We reduce this. So what happens when we have mild, we break this up, right? Oh, this gets kind of broken up and the nightmare scenario kind of disappears. We lower the hump a little bit. We're going to prep for it cognitively. We're going to recognize, hey, this is going to be tough. It's going to be hard. It's going to make me feel uncomfortable. I'm going to get all sweaty. That's okay. It's really not okay, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do what I can manage, right? So I'm going to ask myself, okay, what can I manage? Right? And if it's too terrifying to ask the waiter what's good, you can say, when the waiter asks you at the end of your meal, and they're like, how was everything? Oh, everything was fantastic. Thank you. You can say that. I think you can get away with that. Right? We're not going to get to some of the harder stuff, because then later on, when Dr. K really wants to screw with his patients who have social anxiety, not really, but it's part of the fun of working with people, right? Then it's next time you go to the restaurant and a waiter asks you, how was everything? Because they've done step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6. And they're like, okay, I'm good at talking to people now. Great. So the next time you're unsatisfied with something at a restaurant, tell them when they ask you how was everything. How was it? Oh, everything was great. My fish was undercooked and inedible. Let them know. Right? Just let them know. You just be like, hey, I thought this is I thought it was light on the seasoning, to be honest. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. No, no big deal. Maybe try it. You don't have to say it was horrible, because oftentimes like restaurants and waiters and chefs and line cooks appreciate feedback, right? They want to know if they're like doing something wrong. Instead, they just keep on getting, 3-star reviews on Google or Yelp. And they're just forking over money to Yelp, I suppose, try to fix the problem. Okay, so does that make sense? So really, really common. So let's kind of summarize. So we run into this scenario where we don't know how to talk to people unless they talk to us. And this is where like our friends who are more socially comfortable than we are will say, get out of your comfort zone, right? I need to break through the comfort zone, but I can't. And why is that? It's harder than it appears to be. So some people don't understand this because breaking out of their comfort zone is not that hard. Whereas for some of us, breaking out of our comfort zone is very hard. And so what are the factors that go into that? The first is just a lack of experience. That the mind, in order to keep us safe, populates our head with hypotheticals. Okay? Second thing we have to watch out for, if we've been this way for a while, there may be identity-related stuff going on. The ahamkar may be active. We may be comparing ourselves to other people. It's so easy for other people. I am such a bother, right? So when your mind starts thinking that way, it's not that my conversation is boring. It's that I am boring. So there's a difference between like when you identify with something and like, some attribute. It's like, I suck at dancing. Whereas like, I am a bad person, right? There's a big difference between when we identify with something. And so then we have all these thoughts like I'm bothering people. So if you want to deal with this, what you want to do is we're going to like the general principle of exposure therapy is that we want to have a graduated exposure to things, which is terrifying. And there's nothing more terrifying to someone with a phobia than exposure therapy. They're like, you got to be friggin' kidding me. Like exposure therapy has such a PR problem. It's like, I have a phobia of snakes. Great, we're going to have you swimming in a pit of snakes in 3 months. Fantastic. And I wonder why people don't come back. Okay? So generally speaking, it's because we have all these hypotheticals, and what we want to do is create safe situations that create a physiologic response, which then we acclimatize to. So we want people in exposure therapy to feel safe the entire time. Okay? We don't want them out of there. Let's say, here's your comfort zone. Here's the danger zone. We don't want to move you from here to here. We want to move you here, and then here, and then here. And then the inevitability of moving over there is what terrifies people when it comes to exposure therapy. So you don't have to go all the way if you don't want to, okay? So there are 4 things you can do to decrease that burden, that activation energy that you have to overcome. First is clearly define the interaction. Second is think about your self-image. Like what are people going to think about me if I actually do this? And don't let that answer come up naturally in your mind. Like it's not the first thing that your anxiety thinks of. Actually do like a calculated introspective exploration of, if I sit next to someone and ask them how they're doing today, like how are they actually going to think about it? So you can even restructure that thought. Think about the consequences of taking the action. What is actually going to happen? Is there going to be a party the next day where the waiter, the cashier, this person from my class, and this person from my class's roommate are all going to like talk about me behind my back? That's not going to happen. Right? So, but think through it, engage with those thoughts. And then anticipate your internal challenges. Ask yourself, what can I get away with? What can I manage? Because you don't want to fight yourself, right? It's like, what can you manage? And the cool thing is that when you manage it, then what you can also do, pro tip, good job, you. Strong work. Hey, I actually did it today. Like, I know it was terrifying. Then you're going to feel like an idiot, right? Because like, if you like said hello to someone in class, you can't give yourself a pat on the back because you've fallen behind. You're so socially inept that giving yourself a pat on the back for saying good job, for saying hello to someone, that's pathetic. So watch out for that thought, right? That's your ego as well. So you should give yourself a pat on the back. It's not easy to do. Notice your ego. Anticipate the internal challenge. Right? Be prepared for that voice that says, oh, that was so pathetic. You had to work yourself up just to say hello. You're like, yeah, like it's hard for me. Like, chill, bro. We did it. Right? Like we moved one step forward. So you can reframe that a little bit too. Next tip to remember is that generally speaking, when people are trying to like socially integrate, they'll pick one thing, space it out over a long period of time. Like I'm going to say hello. Hello on Monday, hello on Wednesday, and hello on Friday. You need to pick it up a little bit, right? So you can do more things that are less mortifying. So like do a couple of different things so that you get used to more social interactions. And then watch out for the nightmare scenario, right? Because that's what your mind is going to do. And if you do these kinds of things, hopefully you can start engaging with people. Remember to go slow. Remember not to like, it doesn't matter. Like don't judge I say don't judge yourself. Your mind will try to judge you. Just acknowledge that. Say like, hey, like everyone's on their own road. We all start from where we are. And like whether other people are further ahead or behind or whatever, like that's irrelevant. I am where I am. Okay? And just take it slow. Questions? So this is a great question. Can you help me? I'm too sus because I think my girlfriend might just be too beautiful to be with me. So that can be confusing. It's something I understand really well because I too thought my wife was too attractive to be with me. And that's where like, instead of assuming, so this is the interesting thing. If you think your partner is too attractive to be with you, this is where, you can assume that that's sort of true, or you can recognize that your value is greater than what you think, right? Possible. How to continue from hello? You don't continue at the beginning, okay? So like, you don't have to continue after the hello. You can just say hello and just stop it. And they're like, but that's awkward because I'm not saying anything. Well, it's like, well, there's another human being involved too. So here's the other thing. If you're socially anxious, the other thing you really, really need to remember is that you can't carry the whole fucking conversation, nor should you try to carry the whole conversation. When you try to carry the whole conversation, when you think to yourself, first I'm going to say hello, then I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this. If that doesn't work, I'm going to say this. If that doesn't work, I'm going to say this. That's going to lead to a terrible social interaction. That terrible social interaction is going to make you feel more socially anxious going forward. Don't carry the whole conversation. Don't map everything out. There's another human being involved. Let them carry it. Hello. Don't say anything else. Don't go to plan B if that's the reaction you get. Right? They say, hey, how are you? So if they say, hey, how are you? You can say, I'm doing well. How are you? I'm doing great. Cool. Enough for today. Right? Next day you go in. Sup, man? How's your day going? Up nod. Got it? Dude, like, look at see. Up nod. What the fuck is that? What's this guy doing? So don't carry the whole conversation. That's where a lot of socially anxious people like get tripped up. Is because they try to do all the work. Because you have to like plan for everything that's going to go wrong, right? So it's like, after this happens, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And then you're not having a conversation. You're like playing it like a conversation simulator game in your head, right? Like, then it really is turning into like NPC Oblivion dialogue, where it's like, let me try this dialogue tree, and this dialogue tree, and this dialogue tree, right? So like it's a conversation with another human being involved. So don't play conversation simulator, even though it's really comforting to do. Because what does conversation simulator do for us? Makes us feel safe. If I've mapped out all the conversation, I've predicted every possibility, then I can go into the conversation and feel safe because no matter what, I know what to say. Confidence doesn't come from mapping everything out ahead of time and knowing exactly what's going to happen. That's closer to cheating, right? Like confidence, like if you're playing an RTS and you're map hacking, that's not going to build your confidence because you know where everything is going to be. Confidence comes from playing the map blind. It's like, I can scout, I can handle it. If they're rushing, like not that big of a deal, like, right? So like these conversation maps that you make in your mind is like a map hack that just reinforces your dependence on the map hack, and then you can't play a regular game. Got it? Okay, Cheeto's got a question about DMT. We'll talk about enlightenment in a second. Or like, we've got one more post that we're going to cover. Okay. What about people who always seem like they're in a closed group of friends? You can still interact with them, right? Like, that's okay. If there's a group of people that are all hanging out with each other, you can still just say hello. Like, saying start small. And that's the key thing to remember, is that relationships are two-way, right? So what you want to do is like, it's like, you know, in Dota, there's this emote right now, like where you can high five. So like you can hit a button and there's like this little hand waves above your head. And if another player is near you, they can high five if they hit the emote too. And the hands clap. That's the way it is, right? So we can learn everything from video games. Don't worry, chat. We're in good shape here. So start small and remember that it's reciprocal. Because like this is the problem, is that when you enter into a relationship that isn't reciprocal and you start carrying it, that's when you get into real problems in relationships. Right? Because then you're doing all the work in the relationship and you feel taken advantage of, you feel resentful, and the relationship dies without you texting first. I'm always the person who reaches out. They never reach out to me. Right? That's a challenge too. But you got that way because there was no reciprocity. So then now you've invested into a relationship where like other people are not investing back into the relationship. And then you feel like annoyed and angry. It's like, I spent so much time in this relation. Now I don't want to let it go because it's the only one I've got. But it's not reciprocal. It's tough. Really hard. Do women glance at me because I'm okay looking or because they might think I might be staring? Both of those, as well as a host of other reasons. So I want you to think about what your eyes do when you're out. You scan things. That's probably why women are glancing at you, because they're scanning things. Because that's what most people do. They're just looking in different directions. May have nothing to do with your looks, may have everything to do with your looks. Maybe because you're looking at them, so our brain knows that. So that too, by the way, is like a well-studied phenomenon. First thing that people don't realize is that field of vision actually like goes, 180 degrees. So like if you take your hands, put them kind of like right here, and then move straight out and then wiggle your fingers. This is a cool experiment. You can see the fingers moving, right? So our body, our eyes and brain have this mechanism where we're interpreting a bunch of stimuli that we can't really see. We're not really, you can't really tell what it is. And so if someone is looking at you, we're tuned into that stimuli, we'll look at them, even though you're not really aware that they're looking at you. I mean, you are subconsciously, but you're not consciously aware. So it could be all kinds of stuff. Right? Isn't that cool? Your FOV is way larger than you realize. Even this. Eyes in the back of your head. So there's also interesting, this is a theory of mine, that you can even detect staring behind you. I don't know how the hell this happens. I think it must be something with like ambient noise or movement. But if someone's looking at you behind you, you can tell. It's bizarre. We don't actually have eyes in the back of our head, but it's probably some kind of other stimulus that crosses the threshold of our awareness. Got it? Isn't that neat? Or did I start? I'm sure. There's all kinds of stuff about threshold stimuli that are like really interesting. So this is why, so for example, if people have a psychotic disorder, there's all kinds of stuff that they're not doing that makes people wary of them. So even children like as young as 2 or 3 or even younger will be like wary of people with psychotic disorders. And it's because like they don't emote as well and all kinds of interesting stuff. Okay. The next one. What if there's no one behind me, but I still get the feeling that I'm being watched? Maybe they're just hidden very well. what are my thoughts on EMDR for treating trauma? So it's an evidence-based technique for trauma. It's not something that I've done a whole lot of. By the way, the other thing is, if y'all are in this scenario, I guess I should have said this at the beginning. You can also go get evaluated by a therapist, right? If you like have like bad social stuff going on, like you may actually have an anxiety disorder. So that's important. Okay. I can talk more about schizophrenia and being watched and stuff, but then we won't have time for other stuff. So let's focus. One day we'll do another lecture on schizophrenia is like fascinating it sucks for the people who have it, but from a like scientific from a neuroscience perspective, it's really fascinating. We've learned so much about how the brain works through certain diseases like schizophrenia. Okay. Can't you reduce your presence to not let people notice you? How does that work? Absolutely. So some of y'all are good at being invisible. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, we're not talking about like yogic powers or cloaks of invisibility. You know what I mean. You're good at being unseen and unheard. Right? We're really good at that. It's not the best thing in the world. Right? So being invisible is about safety as well. Okay. Next up, my family disapproves of who I want to be. Let's do that one. Okay. Hey everyone, I've been watching Healthy Gamer for a while and it's helped me out, but this is the first time I've had the courage to write anything. Strong work, right? I recently came out as trans to my family and they have not taken the news well at all. I feel bad because even though it's something that I have wanted to do because it will make me happy, it ends up hurting a lot of people in the process. My friends and extended family have been very supportive of me, but my immediate family is basically disappointed with me. They try to convince me about how I should try to date girls, work out more, and take testosterone so that it would fix me. I know that deep down it wouldn't change my feelings, but it's hard to communicate that to them, so I end up lying. How could I date someone if I can't even look in the mirror and see myself? All my life, I've had feelings of powerlessness, and I've been trying to meet the impossible standards of my parents. I understand that it is a lot for them to process, and I would be very scared if I was in their shoes, but their lack of compassion and understanding is very disheartening. Anyways, if anyone has advice or thoughts and is going through a similar experience, I would love to hear about it. So this, unfortunately, is an increasingly common experience that is precisely why it's very, very important to talk about. So what we're going to talk about now is, first of all, if you're trans, how can you talk to your family? There's going to be a lot of individual variation there depending on, your family and what the situation is. But in general, I think that one of the things that we've missed out on is sort of a skill set to talk to our parents or other people about things that they're not really comfortable with. So it doesn't have to be trans. It can be stepping away from the religion of your parents. It can be stepping into a different religion. It can be wanting to become a professional gamer or streamer as a career. It can be getting a tattoo. It can be moving out of the house. It can be majoring in something that is not, if you're Indian, medicine, pre-law, engineering, finance, or CS, right? Like there are all kinds of things that our family will react poorly to. And then we sort of feel like, there's a lack of compassion and understanding. It starts to feel very disheartening. And then what we end up doing is we end up lying. And why do we do that? It's to preserve some semblance of a relationship, right? Because you can't fix this problem, so I'm going to just sweep it under the rug. Because you care about your family. Presumably your family cares about you. This doesn't seem like, when you try to talk about it, things don't seem to be moving in the right direction. And so as a result, what's the point of having a conversation that's just going to move things in the wrong direction? So then you start avoiding, you start lying, you start feeling internally disconnected from them. You start putting on a mask, and you kind of wind up in the situation where your family disapproves of your choices, whether it's sexuality, gender identity, religion, career choice, what you wear. I one time had a patient whose parent felt personally offended by their grooming habits. They're like, don't you realize how you make me look bad when you don't shave? Don't you realize how bad it makes me look? Right? It's like, I didn't realize that my personal grooming had to be held to the standard of your social reputation. I didn't connect those two dots. Right? So the question then becomes, okay, like, how do we talk to people like this, right? So the first thing is, especially if you're trans, you know, I think you've got to be careful for a number of reasons. The first is that remember that gender identity and even sexuality tend to like take time to form. So I've worked with some trans people who knew from a very, very young age that their gender identity was not like their biological identity. And they were like, it was set in stone a long time ago. They were just born into the wrong body. I've worked with other people who felt like they were non-binary or something in the middle. And then like later on sort of like solidified actually their biological gender, right? So there's the teenage years and adolescence and young adulthood are like a big part of discovering who we are. And so one of the things that I think actually happens way too often is that we try to jump to labels to capture our experience. So for example, like just because someone, you know, starts to have feelings starts to be sexually attracted to the same gender, let's say at the age of 14 or 15, they may be terrified that they're actually homosexual, jump to the conclusion that they're homosexual. They assign themselves a label because it helps them organize their life some. And then later on, they may discover actually that they're bisexual or pansexual. So this is something that I think is actually kind of a problem, is that I think we jump to labels too quickly. And now we have so many labels, right? So I'm like demiflex, I'm non-binary, pansexual, bisexual. So just remember that discovering who you are is a process. It's not something that you have to like figure out by the age of 15 and a half, and then you stamp yourself with a label and that's what it is for the rest of your life. That's been my predominant experience. So give yourself time, you know, don't lock yourself in. If you know what you are, if you're one of the people who knows from the very young age, then that's totally fine. Then it doesn't apply to you. I've seen both versions, okay? So then the question kind of becomes, how do I talk to my family? So this is where, you know, as this person kind of pointed out, it's a lot to absorb, right? So this is also where if you think about issues of gender identity and you think about the time scale that the individual has to come to terms with their gender identity is usually a lot greater than what their family has, right? So like if I've been struggling with my gender identity since the age of 3, and then on my 19th birthday, I come out to my parents as transgender, I've had 16 years to like figure that out, right? And then like 6 months later, my parents haven't nearly had that much time. I mean, they've had 6 months and you've had 16 years. So it is a lot for people to process. They have certain conceptions of you, right? They have certain maybe hopes or dreams or things like that. So parents oftentimes have to go through, when I'm trying to help parents develop healthy relationships with their transgender children, we'll actually go through a mourning process. And I've done this also with parents who have special needs kids. So I'm not trying to say that trans and special needs is the same. My point is that both of these kinds of situations are a parent will develop a conception, or even non-special needs kids, you know, just kids who decide not to become doctors with Indian parents. So there's a mourning process that parents need to go through, where they had all these ideas of like, for example, it seems like, you know, you're born as a man and, you know, you're a transgender woman. So your dad or mom may have had all these dreams and kind of like hopes about what she was going to do with her daughter-in-law, and she was going to have these daughter-in-law spa weekends and all this kind of stuff, right? So your parents have like built up all these conceptions, which it takes time to like let go and mourn. So I think it's healthy for parents to like mourn that kind of stuff. And then you as their child should try to be as patient as you can. So that's the first thing. is to recognize that the timeline that you've had to deal with this change and the timeline that your parents have had to deal with this change is probably different, or your immediate family. The next thing to consider is that oftentimes when you are trying to get your parents to understand, that's the experience that I've had with a lot of trans people, is that they're struggling to get their parents, their family to understand, right? Like their lack of compassion and understanding is very disheartening, which I completely get. So this is where it's foreign to them. So it's going to be hard for them to understand. So I know this sounds kind of weird, but oftentimes what I think is almost like a mistake, or if it's not a mistake, it's just you need to think a little bit about whether this is the primary thing you should be doing at this time, is instead of trying to explain to them what your experience is, try to understand their experience. This is the second thing that you can do. So I would start with questions like this. So when I work with families, these are the kinds of questions I'll ask as a therapist in the room, which kind of brings people together, right? Which is that, so now that you've discovered that, you know, this person who you thought of as a son is actually like your daughter, what is that like for you? What does it mean for you that if I'm a woman instead of a man? What is the significance of that? And you can even dig into some of the stuff that's actually really hurtful, right? So this is the hardest thing, is that sometimes family members will try to like slot you into their conception. So once I have a conception of what your life should be like, and this has nothing to, I mean, this goes way beyond, you know, being trans or special needs or whatever. So if I'm a parent and I have a conception, I'm a baseball coach and I want my son to be a star baseball player. You can have trans expectations, you can have sports expectations, you can have career expectations, right? And to be fair, not all of these have the same level of difficulty in terms of adjustment. So I think coming to terms with the fact that your child is of a different gender requires I would hope, a larger shift than someone who doesn't want to be a professional athlete. If that's bad, if that's the scale of change that a professional change is, and so they have this like conception of what they want you to be, and you don't want to be that thing, right? So they grew, like when you were 2 years old, you got your first catcher's mitt, and they threw the ball around with you every single day, and then you were like, actually, I don't like baseball. I like Fortnite. And then what your parents do is they try to slot you back in there, right? So your parents may say things like, you know, pretty unaccepting things like, try to date girls, work out more, take testosterone so it'll fix you. It'll be like, you know, they're like, get back into the box. We've put this box for you. And you need to inject yourself with a hormone and then get back into the box, right? Because if you have to inject yourself with hormones, that's really, you know, that's how you know what's natural and what is suited to you. So this can happen a lot where parents like just don't understand you. And so they try to like, they're trying to make sense of it. They're trying to like make it work in their head. So they'll try to push you into a particular thing. And that's where I would, you know, once again, ask them questions. So I would start with like questions like, you know, if I dated girls, what do you think that would change? Right? How would that affect me? How would that affect you? What effect do you think dating girls would have? If I started working out more, like, what do you think would happen? So just ask them open-ended questions in a non-judgmental way. And oftentimes I find this is the best way to like expose their ignorance, right? So when they're unable to provide answers to these questions, and they may provide answers like, yeah, like once you work out more, like it'll just become clear. And then like I would dig in a little bit. Help me understand that. So you seem really confident that. What will become clear? You know, like, and then let's say your dad does work out, doesn't work out. Do you feel like when you work out, like do you feel like that's when you feel like a man? Like do you feel like a man at other times too? Like what is your understanding? Like how do you know you're a man? So I would just start to ask lots of questions, right? So try to understand their viewpoint. And as you ask questions and as you sort of like try to understand their viewpoint, that's going to do a couple of really important things. The first is that it'll establish a dialogue of curiosity and understanding instead of trying to convince people or force people or whatever. So you're going to be modeling for them that, hey, like, I'm here to listen, I'm here to try to understand, and it opens the door for them to reciprocate. Huge. This is why people go to licensed therapists, because like therapists establish a foundation of like curiosity and openness and understanding. Second thing it'll do is it'll start to help you understand how to talk to them. Because once you understand their understanding of how the world works, that like transgender issues can just be fixed with testosterone, like gender identity issues can be fixed. And then so, you know, you can be a little bit inquisitive about that. Be like, did you need to take testosterone to understand that you were a man? And then like every once in a while, this is where things get good. Every once in a while, someone will say yes. And your dad will be like, yeah, I went through a very similar thing, started shooting myself up with testosterone, and that's how I learned how to be a man. I swear to God, every once in a while you have that. And then it's an eye-opening moment, right? And it's like, wait a minute. Maybe my dad has gone through something similar, right? Maybe this is why he's terrified, because he's spent his entire life trying to convince himself that he's cisgender. I swear to God, this happens every once in a while. It happens. But it brings people together, right? And so, like, it worked for your dad. Now he doesn't take the testosterone shots. He feels, like, secure in his masculinity, like, whatever. But you'll be amazed. Like, so I've seen this all the times, with, like, especially things like drug abuse. And I've seen this with patients who have to get abortions or thinking about getting abortions and stuff like that. They had no idea, right? Like, I don't want to go into too much detail for patient privacy, so I'll be a little bit chimerical. But there was one kid I was working with who had a parent who was very controlling. And then like kid didn't really know much about like parent in their late teens, early 20s. So parent grew up in the 60s. Okay. So like back in the kind of good old days of the 60s. And they showed their kid was going through a drug problem, showed their kid a picture of them like at Woodstock or something like that. I don't remember the exact festival. And like prompted such an awesome conversation where like the reason the parent was like so restrictive against drugs is because drugs really screwed up their life and they were totally into it and like messed things up and all kinds of stuff. So like it's facilitated some surprising sharing. So what you want to do is ask questions, right? Ask questions. Try to get them to understand. Like explain to me like what do you think is going to happen if I do this, this, or this? Right? So if you've tried dating girls, for example, you can even ask them, what's your understanding of like who I've dated and like what that experience was like? Right? And like, so you can try to understand their perspective. And hopefully what'll happen is usually what happens in my experience. If you sort of approach things non-judgmentally and really try to understand them, what you'll discover is that there's not a whole lot of foundation to their beliefs, or they have some kind of personal investment. And you can even acknowledge that. So like, for example, if you're a male to female, if you're going through a male to female transition and your mom really wanted to have a daughter-in-law, right? Because she's got 2 sons. And so she was really looking forward to having a daughter-in-law, because she wanted to have daughter-in-laws, spa trips. That's where you can like talk to her about that. And it's like, what's it like for you to not have that? Like, what do you think about like me and you going on a spa trip? Right? Because like, yeah, instead of having 2 sons, now you have a son, now you have a daughter. Like, you know, I'd like to do that with you. And those kinds of things are the kinds of moments and discussions and connections, which I think that in discussions of like gender identity, like we just lose sight of. And so try to just really understand their perspective. And then if you're lucky, if you're blessed, if you're lucky, if you set the right kind of foundation and you try to genuinely understand their perspective, even acknowledge their perspective, you can watch the communication workshop, by the way. That's a video on our YouTube channel that is hard to understand, but is really good if you can understand it. Then hopefully they'll start to try to understand you, and then you can start explaining. But generally speaking, it's been my experience that like, you know, someone has to be in the right frame of mind. They have to have an open mind to be able to really hear your words. And what I find too often in conversations between parents and kids is that the parents will have a conception, kid doesn't agree with that conception, and the parent is not really in a frame of mind to listen to what the kid has to say. So it's like it's a flight that, never gets off the ground, basically. And then it leads to increasing frustration and resentment. You're not listening, you're not listening, you're not understanding, you're not understanding. And then you push, and then no one feels understood, and then messes up the communication, and then we go to things like lying and avoidance and let's just pretend and all this kind of other Band-Aid sort of solutions that don't actually fix the problem. And there are a couple of questions you can do to facilitate that. Some of those are really simple questions. They're like, do you want to understand what my experience is? And that's when the parent says yes. And that's when you can ask, okay, what's your understanding so far? And then they'll say, well, I think you're just confused. Okay, what have I said? Have I said that I feel confused at all? They're like, well, no, but you're just confused. Okay. So now you can see why I have difficulty with this conversation, because I'm saying something and I understand that you think I'm confused. But do you see how, from my perspective, it doesn't seem like you're really listening at all? All you're doing is sharing your opinion. Does that make sense to you? Right? Because you're not really acknowledging what I'm saying. And you don't have to get into whether you're trans or not trans. You can sort of focus on the communication issue of the words that I'm speaking are not being received. It's like I'm transmitting this signal, but the signal is not getting received. And so what should we do about that? You can even ask your parents, what should we do about that? Well, you should just take a testosterone shot and that'll fix the problem. It's like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that. Right? So it's a problem for me because I'm feeling like communication is really important for us and that it's not really happening. I'm not sure what else I can do. So if you're in this situation where, you're coming out as trans or anything else that breaks away from your parents' conception, to summarize, a couple of things to keep in mind. The first is that you probably have had more time to come to terms with this than they have. And sometimes the amount of time that you've had is orders of magnitude higher, right? We're talking years versus weeks or months, decade versus 3 months. So try to be as patient as you can. Second thing is remember that they may have to go through some amount of mourning or adjustment, and that talking to them about what that experience is like can be very helpful. So, and then what we want to do is sort of create this environment, this sort of foundation of curiosity and understanding. So instead of trying to get them to understand you, what you need to do is understand them. What does this mean for you if I'm trans? What do you think this means for my life? Are you worried about me, not worried about me? Do you think I'm going to be happy? Do you think I'm not going to be happy? Do you think I'm confused? Help me understand that. Where do you get the idea that I'm confused? Oh, I see. Because I don't understand things the way that you understand them, you're coming to the conclusion that I'm confused. What's your understanding of how long I've been thinking about this and what this journey has been like for me? So you want to start with curiosity. Try to understand their perspective. And hopefully what they'll do, you'll model that behavior and then they'll start to be open-minded towards you. They may have to do some mourning. And then if you're lucky, at some point they'll want to understand your experience and they'll start to ask you questions. And as they ask you questions, they're actually going to be open-minded enough to listen to your answers. The challenge is that for a lot of people who are trying to get their parents to adjust to some change in my life, if I'm trying to get my parents to adjust, I'm impatient, right? I want them to adjust now. The last thing that I'll say is that sometimes your parents are right? Not necessarily saying for gender identity, but sometimes your parents are right. So I've seen this especially when it comes into premature relationships, especially things like marriage, where your parents are you're like, this is my partner. I've known them for 6 weeks and we're in love and we're going to get married. I need you to accept them unconditionally. Your parents are like, well, they're kind of an asshole. No, support me unconditionally. This is my choice. I choose my choice. Either you need to accept them or we're done. It's 18 months later, you get divorced and your parents are kind of they don't say it. They're I told you so. So sometimes you should also remember, hopefully you have this kind of relationship with your parents where they really do love you and they really do care about you. And their hesitation doesn't necessarily mean that, and this is what we're seeing more and more with the internet, right? It's like I'll post about something on the internet and, you know, it'll be full of my cognitive biases and I'll get like all kinds of support from the echo chamber. And then I get really, really upset by my nuclear family when they don't support me the same way as this echo chamber on the internet. Well, there's like more to it than that, right? So hopefully, you know, what I would strongly, strongly recommend is that you facilitate conversation and you be patient and give them time. It's possible that things don't end up going well, that they really don't want to understand or they're not going to try to understand, in which case you have my condolences. But this is the other unfortunate thing is you can't force someone to understand. Right? That's something that you can't do. The best you can do is sort of tee things up for the highest probability of that happening. So you got to be careful. Yeah, I've seen all kinds of just nasty stuff on echo chambers. It's like, okay, questions. Okay. Are we going to play Disco Elysium again? I hope so. I see that chat seems all over the place. I mean, can we send the community to save the logo at our place? I mean, I think y'all can if you want to, but I know this may sound kind of weird. It's pixels on the internet. Like, I think it's cool and all, but like, do we really want to spend... Like, what do y'all think is... So here's why we stream. Okay? I know it's kind of weird. I may be like shooting myself in the foot and upsetting people. So I love Place. I would... The internet member that I am, like the citizen of the internet that I am, wants to log on to Place and make sure that our logo gets preserved and fight with all the other people for the sake of the cult. But let's remember, like, why do we stream here? Like, do we want to spend another 15 minutes trying to fix this logo on Place where the trolls will see what we're doing and it'll incite them to do more? Or do we want to talk about like DMT and meditate? Right? So like, we'll sure, let's do it one last time. And let's also remember that just because it's part of, you know, what we're doing and it's kind of fun, doesn't, like, we don't want to lose focus. So we'll do this. We'll try one more time. Okay. Let's see. Fix the logo. Oh. 18. It was above the Kirby, right? Here it is. Oh, someone is drawing a penis over it. This is not a fight we're going to win. We'll try, but it's not a fight we're going to win. Is it this one? I'll do this. There. All right. So we can try to fix it, but you see what I'm saying? Like, is this really what we want to spend our times with? Like, let's just, let's understand that here's the healthy gamer community. Here's the we love putting penises on the internet community. Which community do you think is stronger? Right? Like, we're going to take the L. Okay? I mean, we're like, you know, it's just... I mean, we can try to fix it. But I think if you guys really want to fix it, what we need to do is change something over here. Like, if you make the penis extend this way, it'll probably work. Right? Like, you can't just erase the penis with positivity. You have to give them an alternate penis. You get what I'm saying? Like erase, they're just going to replace this. So what we need to do is like, you know, make like a penis going this way and a penis going this way, and then they'll. Yeah, that's another thing you could do is just make it shorter. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, I mean, so I'll stay on top of this today, but, you know, let's talk about DMT and meditation. Yeah, so like, what's this over here? Okay. All right. So we're just going to talk a little bit. All right, we're going to take a look at a paper. Oh, God. Let's close that. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about psychedelic experiences and meditation, and specifically some of the weirder stuff that happens with particular psychedelics and in meditation. And I'm going to teach y'all a preliminary technique for some weird stuff in meditation. So what I'm going to teach you all today is actually the first step to let me think about what the right frame is. I'm going to teach you all the first step to having an out-of-body experience through meditation, okay? So let's talk a little bit about this for a moment. So meditation is, generally speaking, a practice that has been scientifically studied and, you know, has a lot of health benefits. There's overwhelming data that it is good for depression and anxiety and arthritis and all this kind of stuff. Meditation was originally designed for the purpose of gaining enlightenment or understanding the true nature of reality. But the interesting thing is that if you look at meditation along the way of developing a strong meditative practice, sometimes people have consistently reported having strange, almost supernatural experiences. So one of those experiences is something like an out-of-body experience, or what people will call astral travel or astral projection. We're going to sort of like leave science to the side here because I don't really know what kind of scientific evidence there is of these things. We're going to talk a little bit about it. Or we'll talk about it the extent of what science sort of tells us. But we're really going to go beyond science because I think that so meditation has been around for at least 5,000 years. Scientific studies on meditation have been around for about 30 or 40 years for the most part. So we're like really lagging behind scientifically compared to the history of what's existed in meditation. Now, a lot of people may be put off by this kind of content, which totally makes sense because a lot of what we share is sort of based in science, based in evidence, based in medicine. Totally fine. So not your cup of tea. But I think part of what we try to do here on stream and you know, for the internet is like just talk about this stuff. So the truth is that these traditions have existed for a long, long time, and that people have consistently had these kinds of experiences. And so I think ignoring that is a sterilization of meditation, which I personally don't think is ideal. So what we've started to do with a lot of meditation is we've gotten rid of things that we don't understand without sort of really evaluating them. It's just like, we can't study that, so let's just pretend it doesn't exist. And the biggest, at the top of the list is just talking about enlightenment. So you have all these apps for meditation, you have all these YouTube videos for meditation, but like no one talks about enlightenment anymore, which blows my mind because that's been the point, right? So like everyone talks about Buddhism, but like no one talks about enlightenment. Like there are books on Buddhism, there are books on detachment, there are books on things that we understand. So what we've sort of done is we've taken this meditative body of knowledge, which is huge, and what we've done is like only accept the part which already makes sense to us, which is sort of okay, right? Because like we want to remember that we can't just accept everything part and parcel, right? Because like there could be a lot of wrong stuff in there. So we want to be critical. We want to be skeptical. We should absolutely be scientific. And at the same time, I don't think we should ignore or discount the rest of it, because some of this stuff can be studied or explored in a systematic way. And that's actually what I'm going to share with you all today, is a particular paper on DMT, which sort of made me feel like it's okay to kind of talk about this stuff. So let's take a quick look at the paper, okay? And what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about like, what the hell is going on with this stuff? Like this astral travel, like otherworldly beings, like states of consciousness. Because what tends to happen, actually, before we go to the paper, what tends to happen is you'll get people who are kind of into meditation, and then they'll really step outside of like what they know and will start talking about all kinds of crap. So like quantum mysticism is a good example of this. It's something that I've been guilty of in the past, am still somewhat guilty of, and will probably be guilty of in the future. One of the things that I've learned is that some of it's kind of BS, which is okay. We'll get to that in a second too. But I think part of the problem here is that you have a lot of people who like believe in this stuff, whereas the predominant experience I've had with like supernatural sort of stuff, for lack of a better term, is it's not nearly as like romantic as people think it is. So when it comes to things like karma and seeing people's karma and understanding your past lives and stuff like that, as a society, we've romanticized it, but like the truth is that it's like way more simple than that. So, my experience of past lives and working with people in their past lives is that it's no different from your memories. It's just like, the way I describe it is it's memories of, it's when you have a memory, but it's just not like this body. So like, you have memories, and memories are completely normal. They're not drastic. They're not transformative. They're like, what did I do yesterday? Oh yeah, like I was wearing a yellow shirt, and then you have a memory of like you in a yellow shirt. The only difference is that if you remember a past life, it's sort of like, it's a different you, right? But it's not anything special. It's kind of weird. So I think that there's like a lot of like romanticization of it. And that also creates like a lot of problems, because I think a lot of the people who like advocate for this kind of stuff really do kind of like think themselves into it. So I don't think it's actually born of genuine spiritual practice. It's like they want to believe that this thing is going to happen. And so like something mild happens and they like really think they understand it. And like, oh my God, my consciousness has been elevated. What does that even mean? Most of the stuff, honestly, most of the people that I've talked to, like I think are just kind of full of crap. So what I'd like to do today is share a scientific paper I was looking at on DMT. So DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. So ayahuasca is, I think, a kind of cactus that is used by certain Native American tribes as like part of their religious ceremonies and as part of like spiritual journeys and things like that. So I do not advocate for the use of any psychedelics without medical supervision or the appropriate supervision. I suppose if it's part of a religious tradition that you're a part of, and there are people in your religious tradition that know what they're doing, that's probably okay too. But generally speaking, as a medical doctor, I do not advocate for the usage of any of this stuff. So let's take a quick look at the paper and see what they sort of see, okay? So an encounter with the other, a thematic and content analysis of DMT experiences from a naturalistic field study. So let's first talk a little bit about what a naturalistic field study is. So in medicine, we tend to have, there's a lot more than two, but there are two kinds of trials. So we'll do something called a randomized controlled trial, which is when we take a group of people, we'll like divide them into a control group, in a treatment group, or an intervention group. And then, so we have a control, and we have an intervention group and a control group. And then we also randomize them. So we don't pick a particular population for a particular group. So they're randomly assigned to each one. And then we'll offer the intervention. We'll kind of see what happens. So there are a lot of studies by drug companies, for example, that will do like randomized controlled trials. They'll submit those to the FDA or like whatever the European Union authority is. And so you'll have a medication like, let's say like aripiprazole or clozapine. So these are both antipsychotic medications that have been shown in clinical trials to be very, very effective at treating various conditions. So things like adjunctive treatments for depression, bipolar disorder, things like that. So actually, let's use quetiapine, which is a good example for bipolar disorder. So they did this randomized controlled trial where you take 1,000 people who sign up to be in a clinical study, usually. And then they'll kind of randomize them to groups, and they'll give one group quetiapine, and they'll give the other group not quetiapine. They'll measure particular things, and they'll sort of say, hey, see, quetiapine works. It'll go through FDA approval. People start prescribing quetiapine. And then what happens is, like, the effects that you see in the real world for this medication are not nearly as good as what you saw in the randomized controlled trial. So there's a really good trial called STEP-BD, which is a naturalistic study of bipolar disorder. And what does naturalistic mean? It means that the trial is uncontrolled. And that offers some advantages and some disadvantages. On the one hand, we can't control for every variable, which is bad. But on the other hand, it much more closely mirrors real life because it's a naturalistic study. So what they did in STEP-BD is they gave people medication. They just saw what happened. So they, like, you know, did someone quit? Did they continue taking it? Did they get better? Did they not get better? And they just sort of just like watch what happens in the real world. And what they discovered in STEP-BD is that adherence, so people taking medication like quetiapine, was very, very low. So when I'm like part of a trial and I'm getting free medication, or I'm even getting paid to try the medication, like, I may take it, especially if they're going to be like measuring my blood levels and stuff like that. I'm going to like take it no matter what, right? Whereas in the real world, what quetiapine does is makes people sleepy, and it causes people to gain weight. We're talking anywhere from 5 to like 50 pounds, right? So in the real world, when you have someone with bipolar disorder and you prescribe them quetiapine, like, they can't play music much anymore. They feel kind of foggy. They have difficulty working. They put on 30 pounds. And so what do? They stop taking the medication. And so, like, even though the medication has this kind of benefit, which is significant, in the real world, if you give it to a human, the likelihood that they'll get that theoretical benefit is way lower because of things like side effects. So I personally like naturalistic studies. I think that they mirror like the real world better, which is because they're not randomized and they're not controlled. The quality of information in some ways is worse, right? Because there are all kinds of individual variables in naturalistic studies that we can't control for. So in a sense, a non-naturalistic study is like good because you're looking at the pure effect of the medication. You're ignoring things like side effects and like, not really, I mean, there's also allowances for side effects and stuff in those studies. But generally speaking, it's like, it's a pure scientifically valid laboratory kind of experiment. But in the real world, things are different. So in this study, what they did is they took DMT, or they didn't take DMT. They took 36 people who used DMT, and they started asking them questions like, what was your experience? What was it like? What happened to you? Things like that. So they did content and thematic analysis, right? So let's take a quick look at that. Ooh, so bright. Okay. So N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or tryptamine, is an endogenous serotonergic psychedelic capable of producing radical shifts in conscious experience. So if memory serves, it activates serotonin receptor 5-HT2A. So there's like certain things associated with that. Increasing trends in its use, as well as new trials administering DMT to patients, indicating the growing importance of a thorough elucidation of the qualitative content over and above structure which the drug occasions. This is particularly in light of the hyper-real, otherworldly, and often ontologically challenging yet potentially transformative nature of the experience, not least encounters with apparently non-self social agents. Laboratory studies have been limited by clinical setting and lacking qualitative analyses of the experiential content, while online surveys limitations lie in retrospective design, uncontrolled use, and both of which not guaranteeing breakthrough experiences. So screened, healthy, anonymized, and experienced DMT users were observed during their non-clinical use of the drug at home. And then in-depth semi-structured interviews on 36 people, okay? So what they essentially did was, 36 post-DMT experience interviews with mostly Caucasian, 80%, males, 8 females. So this is 28 to 8 in terms of gender ratio. Of average 37 years were predominantly inductively coded, okay? The first overarching category comprised the encounter with other beings, 94% of reports. So this is with 34 of the 36 people talked about encountering otherworldly beings. And so this is kind of interesting, right? So then like encompassing superordinate themes, including the entity's role, appearance, demeanor, communication, and interaction, while the second overarching category comprises of experiences of emerging into other worlds, 100% of reports. Many further mid-level themes and sub-themes also illuminate the rich content of the DMT experience. Okay? So basically what this study did is it took experienced DMT users, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'm sure they define it. And they asked them, like, what happens when you use DMT? And 34 out of 36 were like, we encounter otherworldly beings. And 100% were like, we visit other worlds. So what the hell does that actually mean? Right? Like, what's going on here? So let's like run through a couple of options. So the first is like, let's take kind of a neurobiological approach. So like there's an argument. So here's the question that I'm basically trying to explore. Is this real? Do otherworldly beings exist? Can you travel to different planes of existence and like all this other weird stuff? Is any of that crap real? So the first thing to kind of note is that we don't really have any evidence of this stuff existing, right? We have no pictures, we have no signals, we have no way that these beings communicate with us in a verifiable, consistently reproducible answer, at least that I'm aware of. If y'all know about, transmissions from alternate universes, please let me know. We'll get to what's real in a second. So then the question is like, okay, if we don't have any like concrete evidence that this stuff actually exists, like what's going on? So there's the neurobiological hypothesis, which essentially says that this is like your brain malfunctioning, for lack of a better term. So we have these parts of our brain that interpret stimuli, and if you directly stimulate them with drugs, it'll create these kinds of artificial experiences which sort of aren't real, right? And so there's no real there. It's just our brain is kind of messed up, and it's all essentially like an illusion within our brain or within our mind. Now, I personally lean a little bit away from that explanation, so I completely agree that we have no evidence that these things exist and that they communicate with us in an objective, reliable manner. But I think this is where we start to get into amateur philosophy, which I'm sure if y'all are philosophers out there, you'll be able to explain this better than I can. But one of the things that we understand about the brain is that like it interprets stimuli and creates a reality, right? So the simplest thing to think a little bit about is that, when I look at this table and I touch this table, it feels solid to me. It looks solid to me because I can't penetrate it with my eyes. But the truth is that most of the table is like empty air, right? It's like electrons spinning in orbits. And even the force that I feel is the result of electrons. It's not actually like physical resistance. It's not like my atom is bumping against a physical barrier. I think it's like, what we consider physicality is mostly empty space. So our brain is sort of designed to interpret things. So we also see this like neurologically, that the brain can interpret things that don't exist. So phantom limb is a really good example of this. So phantom limb, sometimes people will lose a limb and then there are no nerves left there, right? Because it's gone. And yet we know that people will experience sensations in their phantom limb, unfortunately most commonly pain. And so even though your hand is gone, you feel like there's a hand there. Now this has sparked sort of this idea in the spiritual realm of like, oh, you have an astral body and the astral body is still intact. That's why you can still feel things. I don't really know if I really buy into that because we sort of have neurological explanations for that, your somatosensory cortex, the map in your brain has neurons that are devoted to this part of my limb. And even if I lose this part of my limb, sometimes like signals will get sent, which get interpreted by our central signal interpretation apparatus is the existence of a limb. So we kind of know that. So which one is it? We certainly know sort of the scientific side of it, in phantom limb. There are also really cool exercises that you can do that can trick your brain into making the phantom limb pain go away. And that's the kind of thing that if there's truly an astral body, I don't know how that sort of makes sense. So there's a fantastic book called Phantoms in the Brain where a neurologist creates this cool apparatus. So if I'm missing my right hand, okay, like if I lost my right hand in an accident, I have phantom limb pain, there's a cool thing that the neurologist did is he built a box where I stick my left hand in the box. And over here, there's a mirror that shows the reflection of my left hand. But since it's in a mirror, it looks like my right hand. So I see something that looks like my right hand, but it's really just a reflection of my left hand. And if I'm experiencing phantom limb pain, and I put my left hand in this box, and I can't see my left hand, by the way, because it's covered. It's just stuck through a hole. And then I move my hand, and I see my right hand moving over here, suddenly the phantom limb pain goes away. Right? So there's some kind of like feedback that I get from like looking at my right hand being intact and healthy and moving normally that makes the phantom limb pain go away. Okay? Well-studied stuff. So you guys can look this stuff up. I think the guy's name is Ramachandran, if memory serves. Rusty. So in terms of like astral bodies and stuff, right? So that's where like is like I gotta wonder, like how does that work from your astral body? How does seeing the reflection of your left hand that looks like your right hand, like what does that do to the astral body? If the astral body is in pain, like how does that work, right? I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. So, we know that the brain is capable of interpreting stimuli and sort of like makes a representation of the world. Now that's like basically what the brain does. So we don't actually see reality, right? So someone earlier was asking, what is reality? Well, like we don't really know. So what we see is not actually real. And as a psychiatrist, like this is something that's very clear to me, is that the mind does not produce an accurate representation of reality, right? So if I have a patient who's suicidal and thinks that their family would be better off without them, that is like factually, like pretty clearly incorrect, right? So the family will even tell them, no, we'll be lost without you. We love you. Don't go anywhere. But in the mind, our mind is capable of producing these things that we call cognitive biases, which shape reality to look a particular way, which it isn't. And even when we look at things like the wavelength of light, right? So like light only looks the way it does because of the way that our photoreceptors react in the construct that our brain kind of puts together, right? So we can't, I don't know that, and this is where I'm not really an expert here, but when I look at the world and I see red, it's unclear to me whether that red is real, right? It's a wavelength of light. That's really all we know. And my mind interprets it as red, right? That's what I think it is. So in general, like our mind is between us and reality. I think that we're pretty sure about. Maybe I'm wrong there. And so it's kind of weird. So like we even have weird things like, telescopes and night vision goggles. So like when if I have a telescope and I like look into like something over here, it makes it seem like the moon is like right in front of my face, right? Like I'm looking at the moon like right here. But the moon isn't actually there, right? So like it's kind of weird because the moon is like up there. So that's really where it is. And now I'm interpreting it as over here. And I essentially like use a telescope to make the moon appear closer, right? But then we kind of get the question like, okay, so like what's real there? Like is what I see real, or is, the moon is really far away and I'm using an instrument to make this thing appear closer? And then the other thing that's kind of important, the reason that we sort of conclude that the moon is really there and that this is like a fair interpretation is because anyone who looks in the telescope will see the moon, right? Like anyone who looks in the telescope will like see the moon. So when we have a conservation of human experience, that's what we sort of call objective reality. So if we say that like, to the west is the Pacific coast and to the east is the Atlantic coast, that's true if you're in North America. So we have like a bunch of human beings that get together on some shared experience and we decide that this is reality. So then the question kind of becomes, okay, so like if that's sort of how we determine like what's real and what isn't, and there are arguments against that, I'm sure, then what's going on with this DMT stuff, right? So then this is where there's a part of me that kind of wonders, is this essentially like a telescope, right? Is this like a tool that we can use does it represent reality? Like sort of, or is there something real that we're picking up on, which our brain is then interpreting in a particular way, right? So we call these things beings because we don't have, this word is so hard to use, but I'm going to try to use it anyway. So we don't understand the dimension at which they exist because we're going off into left field. So that's the best word I can use, right? Oh my God, they're like alternate dimensions. Like, oh my God. No, but like literally, like what our brain does is interpret stimuli based on our understanding, right? So like our brain is a pattern generating machine. That I feel pretty confident in. So we have this encounter with this thing, and then we call it a being because we don't know what else to call it. It's the closest thing in our approximation. But then the question still remains, like, is that thing real? Is there something really out there? Or is it just like is it like a phantom limb, or is it the telescope looking at the moon? Right? That's the main question. Now, generally speaking, I'm of the mind that there is like stuff out there. I don't know how else to describe it. And that's primarily because of my experiences in meditation. Okay? So that's where, like, you know, in the absence of a substance, when you meditate for a prolonged period of time and you have like a weird experience, it sort of shapes the nature of your reality. Like it changes you. And that's what we sort of know this, some of this stuff, we know the effects of this scientifically. So we know that, for example, people who meditate on a regular basis will like be more empathic, be more compassionate. So we can see some of the outcomes that we can measure of meditation. But when you really like talk to people, like oftentimes what leads to these like profound changes in compassion are like these spiritual experiences. And this is where like even William James talks about this stuff in the Varieties of Religious Experience, where he kind of talks about, you know, religious delusions and spiritual experiences and all this kind of stuff. Like what's psychosis? What's a spiritual experience? Like, you know, we know that human beings have these weird things that happen to them. So then the next thing to kind of think a little bit about is that, what was I going to say? The next thing to consider is that any substance tends to activate the brain, right? It doesn't actually like create new neurocircuitry. So for example, you know, when I use cocaine, the reason it's so addictive is because it's activating circuitry that's already there. So even in the case of DMT, we know that, for example, DMT activates 5-HT2A, so a particular serotonergic receptor. So then it sort of implies, what? Why is everyone freaking out? Oh, well, so when I say when we use cocaine, no, I meant like, I didn't mean we. I've never used cocaine. I mean like when humans, we know what it does, right? I'm using we in the collective. We know what it does as in science knows what it does. No, I stick with T, chat. So when we use a substance, it just activates the neurocircuitry that's already there, okay? So even in the case of DMT, like we know that it activates 5-HT2A. Now, this is where things get kind of interesting. So we know that, for example, opioids activate the mu receptors, right? We know that cannabinoids activate cannabinoid receptors or anandamide. So THC or marijuana activates those receptors. So we know that all these things like will activate receptors in our brain. So then the question kind of becomes, if it's just turning on something in the brain, do you need the substance at all? So this is where, you know, I don't know that we have a clear answer, because it may be possible that DMT activates the brain in a way that it is impossible to endogenously activate the brain. I don't know. But generally speaking, I think that most things that drugs can do, we can get some kind of approximate experience ourselves, because we all have 5-HT2A receptors in our brain that get activated all the time. It's just about cultivating a particular kind of practice that like activates those receptors through that practice. Now that too is a scientific statement that hasn't been borne out. We don't know if that's true. So the skeptical side, which I live with, will say like, well, we don't really know that you can activate that constellation of receptors in that way endogenously. Because it's not, you know, 5-HT2A receptors all over your brain. So DMT may, you know, get uptaken by particular cells, may get distributed in a particular way that may not be possible to endogenously create. What I do know, though, is that, you know, a lot of the experiences that people will describe with psychedelics are very similar to what I've experienced with meditation. The biggest difference is that in meditation, it's not as sexy, for lack of a better term. So, you know, in terms of like encounters with otherworldly beings, it's like, it feels like really normal. It's hard to describe. So a lot of the things that I've come to understand, so this is, I'm going to say something weird that's kind of hard to describe, but so like, you know, through meditation, I've come to understand, this is going to sound weird. I've come to understand the rhythms of the universe. And like, what the hell does that even mean? It's hard to describe. It's sort of like, like gravity. So gravity is like a thing that we all see and we're aware of and we account for, but it's not anything magnificent, right? Like, sure, it's like when you think about it, it's amazing that all these orbits and stuff like that. But on a day-to-day basis, like gravity is like, it's gravity. So in that way, like understanding the rhythms of the universe is just sort of like, it's like gravity. It's like understanding that there is a kind of gravity in terms of a general universal force that acts in the world that you understand now when you meditate. So it's just like knowledge of gravity is the best way I can put it. And it is as simple as gravity, at least in my experience. So is that pretty cool? Sure. Is it useful? Absolutely. Is it like neat to think about? Yeah, but it's not like this weird, like, oh my God, like I understand like the rhythms of the universe, man. I don't even know what that means. It's even hard to describe because it's just sort of like you kind of, intuitively understand how gravity works. So you know that if you like pick up a rock and you drop it, it's going to fall. Like it's as simple as that. So in terms of otherworldly beings, like that too, I would sort of say is this sort of thing where like, you just kind of encounter them and they're just sort of there and they're chilling. I think it's like kind of like plant life. It's sort of like, it's kind of doing a thing. And sometimes they're pretty cool. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's not as, it's not like the way that it's portrayed in movies and that yoga hippies talk about, or people who have done drugs for that matter. So the experience seems to be much more drastic and bizarre when people use drugs. So what I'd like to do today is like at the end of the day, like one of the things that I like to say believe in at HG is like, like we can talk about this stuff, but at the end of the day, like y'all should just try it, right? So this is where what I'm going to do today is teach y'all essentially the first step to out-of-body experiences, okay? So these are practices which have been taught in the meditative tradition for thousands of years and have been consistently used to help people cultivate something like an out-of-body experience. So a couple of like very important disclaimers. If if you're concerned at all, you should definitely talk to your medical professional about this kind of stuff. If you have histories of trauma, depersonalization, derealization, I do not recommend this, okay? So y'all got to be kind of careful about that sort of stuff. So the simplest way to describe it is, I know it sounds kind of weird, but let's just start here. So I'm going to walk y'all through this a little bit, okay? So where do thoughts exist? First question. Okay? I know it's kind of a weird question. Where are thoughts? No. I don't want a scientific answer. So forget about science for a second. Where do you experience thoughts? Like in space. So when you say mind, is mind localized in space? So is your mind in your... Now, hold on a second, because some people are saying head, and some people are saying no. So this is something that I did not understand until I had an out-of-body experience. That your thoughts are absolutely localized in space. Okay? So let me put it this way. When I'm thinking, look at your hand. This is a weird meditation. Look at your hand. Are the thoughts over here? Do you have thoughts over here? Right? Do your thoughts exist in the next room? Right? Most people are saying no. Like your thoughts go with you. Does that make sense? Like I experience thoughts here. It's kind of weird. So this is a weird thing is that sometimes when you're talking to people about this stuff, unless you've had an experience like this, like it doesn't make any fucking sense. So the first thing to understand is that we have always assumed that thoughts have no location because they are not physical things. Right? Because it's not a physical thing. It can't have a location. Because a property of a physical object is that it has a location. The property of a location is that it's a physical object. But when you think, your thoughts go with you. They don't like stay in your bedroom. They don't stay at the school or stay at the traffic light that it's red. It carries with you. So the next thing to think a little bit about is where within you do your thoughts exist? It's hard to describe, but I'd say they exist kind of here. In your head, right? Because like I don't feel thoughts in my hand. I don't feel thoughts like in my elbow. Like this doesn't think. It's kind of weird. But like they're kind of here, which is sort of weird. And if y'all have lost me already, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Okay? And so some people are like in between the ears. Like, yeah, so that's kind of weird, right? So like the first thing is that we've always assumed that your thoughts don't exist in space. But now we have an experience that our thoughts are localized in space. So if y'all want to understand what an out-of-body experience is, or what astral projection or all that crap is, it's that experience of thought outside of your body. So what's going to happen is your thoughts are going to like, your experience of thought is just going to like be like in the corner of the room, which is just weird. It's not drastic. It's not revolutionary, because even the experience of thoughts in your head is nothing amazing. It's just like I'm thinking, right? It's so taken for granted. We carry them around with us all the time that we don't even realize they have a localization in space. Right? You don't even realize, because it's always been in the same place. Right? So even if you understand that your thoughts have localization in space, you're taking the first step forward. So now what we're going to do is we're going to teach you all the first step of the practice. Now this is going to be hard. So a couple of other disclaimers. So if you have any kind of discomfort or anything feels weird or things like that, like stop the practice. There are cases of meditation-induced psychosis. So if you have psychotic disorders, if you're using drugs, things like that, I do not recommend doing this kind of stuff. It's basically safe to do. I've never seen a meditation-induced psychosis from this practice before. But if anything weird is happening, please go consult a doctor, okay? So what we're going to do for this practice, I recommend laying down. So you want to wear like light, generally speaking, comfortable clothing. And what we want to do is essentially enter a state of deep relaxation. And then it's so hard to describe, but what we're going to do is you're going to find that as your body like relaxes further and further and further, there's going to be a buoyancy that you feel. And the buoyancy is basically going to be like, you may notice that the buoyancy feels like it's coming right above your body, but it's going to be anchored. And the best example I can use is if you guys have seen Harry Potter movies, you know how when a Dementor is like attacking someone, like you see their soul like coming out of their body? It sort of feels like that. What I imagine that feels like, except it's not unpleasant at all. Right? So it's like there's a part of you that's going to be like pulling outside of your body. Okay? But it's not bad. That's the problem. It's like you can use analogies, but like that seems terrifying. But you're just going to be like, you're going to like kind of, it's weird. You're just going to be buoyant. Okay? Now, is this stuff real? Like, who knows? Like, it may just be some, let's remember that scientifically meditation creates weird experiences. So all we got to do is just like, it's not a real thing. You're not actually leaving your body. You're just some weird trick of the brain. Okay? So, starts very simply. So if you guys want to participate, you can join in. We'll do this for about 10 minutes, okay? So what I want you to do is lay down on the floor. Okay? Think a little bit about the temperature. So sometimes when you engage in this practice, you'll feel a little bit chilly. And generally speaking, the fewer sensations that your body experiences, the better your chances are of entering the meditative state. Okay? So what that means is that you don't want to be particularly hungry, you don't want to pee, you don't want to be cold, you don't want to be hot, you don't want to be thirsty. So try to take care of that stuff. We'll give you guys like 60 seconds to pee if you need to, get water if you need to, grab a light sheet if you want to. Okay? No, we're not going to use DMT. DMT free. Okay? So I would not recommend doing this in your bed because that'll probably engage you in sleep. But basically what we're going to try to do is create a neutral experience in our body, as neutral as possible. And as our body stops sending us signals, we will start to like feel our consciousness more robustly, for lack of a better term. Okay? You can do it in a comfy chair. Back should be straight though. Yeah, it's interesting. I've never tried this kind of stuff in a sensory deprivation tank. Rock and Roll's asking, I had depersonalization a few years ago. Can I try this, Dr. K? I'm no longer depersonalization. I would talk to whichever medical professional managed your depersonalization and ask them if it's okay to try. Okay? Pillows, okay. Yeah, dark room is good. Meditation is a whole different ballgame. Completely different. I mean, sorry, levitation. So, lay down. And what I want you to do is close your eyes. And just take a moment to notice your body on the floor. Just notice all the sensations. Notice all the signals that it's sending you. And all of the... And notice that each of the signals that your body sends you kind of anchor you to your body. Right? You notice them in the present. They exist in the present. They pull you towards the present. They pull your attention towards that particular thing. So if you feel hungry, your attention is on the hunger. If you feel thirsty, your attention is on the thirst. If you feel tightness, your attention is on the tightness. And now what we want to do is take a deep breath in. And as you exhale, slowly relax. Notice the way that you hold tension in your arms, maybe shoulders, maybe neck. Maybe your feet are straight up. Let them fall to either side. Palms face up. Breathe in and out and relax into the ground. Now what I want you to do is go into the breath. And with each breath you take, go fully into the breath and exhale. And now I want you to focus on your toes. And notice any kind of tension that may be in the toes. You can wiggle them a little bit if you need to. Work out a little bit of that extra energy. And then try to fully relax your toes. And now move on to your feet. Feel that tension in your ankles. Pressure on the heels. And then relax those. And now move up to your calves and your shins. As you breathe in and out, let them fully relax. And now move on to your knees. Notice the tension in your knees. And as you exhale the next time, let that relax as well. And now move on to your thighs. Deep breath in And as you exhale, slowly relax. And now notice the tension in your fingers. Let your fingers relax with your next exhalation. And then feel that energy in your wrists, the tension that gets stored up there. Deep breath in and out. And then forearms. As you exhale, relax your arms. Let your hand and arm hang limp, supported fully by the floor. And then up to your biceps and elbows. As you breathe in and out, let those relax. And then move on to your shoulders. Let your shoulders relax. And then with a deep breath in and out, let your arms and legs fully relax. And now your abdomen and back, your lower back. Feel the tension there. Feel the way that you sit in your chair all day, causing it to curve, causing it to tighten, holding all that negative energy. And as you breathe in and out, let that relax. And now moving on to your chest. Feel the gentle rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. As you exhale, let your chest sink down. With your next breath, let your neck relax. Feel the tension, especially where your neck touches the base of your skull. Now relax your head. Let your head sink back. Don't suspend it any longer with your neck. Let it go. Your neck is always holding your head up, holding it, holding it, holding it. Let it go. And now move to the tension in your face. See how you always hold the tension there. The eyes always needing to be open. The mask that you wear. Let everything fall away. And now what we're going to do is take 8 breaths. With each breath, what we're going to do is try to double our relaxation. So notice the tension in your body, and you're going to let half of it go with your next breath. Deep breath in and out. Let half the tension go. In and out, and let half the tension go. You may notice there are a couple of holdouts in your body, stubborn areas where you can feel the tension remaining. You can focus on those and let it go. Another breath. And now continue at your own pace for 4 to 5 more breaths, sinking further and further into relaxation. And now that you're in a state of relaxation, if you have a breath or two, go ahead and finish it. Notice how heavy your body feels. And let your body sink. And you may start to feel a buoyancy. Start to feel as if your body has almost like there's a part of you that's straining against the surface of your body. Don't push it. Let it float. Now you can continue for as long as you want to. It's tricky, but you don't want to push yourself out. And just, it's hard, but hold that space of floating. And the longer that you're able to hold it, the greater the capacity to float. So just stay in that zone. It's hard. Either my words or your body or a sense of nervous energy, all of these things will disrupt that space. And now we're going to go ahead and come back. It may feel relieving to be coming back, that there's a certain nervous tension, almost as if the relaxation is too difficult. So you can go ahead and come back. You don't need to relax anymore. When you're ready, go ahead and sit up with your eyes closed. Let your back be straight. Deep breath in. Deep breath out. Go ahead and put your hands together, rub them together like Namaste position. Rub, 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 rub. Cup them over your eyes. Breathe in, and as you breathe out, open your eyes. Let your body come back. Okay. So, couple of tips. First thing, if you really want to do this practice properly, you need to do it for an hour. Okay? Very little will happen in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Requires practice. So even if you failed, that's okay. This practice was not designed to succeed. This is a practice that has all kinds of other benefits, right? So for those of you saying, I felt sleepy. Okay, well now you have something for insomnia. I feel really tired, or I felt tired. I feel refreshed. It's a nice way to take a break. All that crap is true too. Those are all the scientific benefits of a meditative practice, which we can reliably say we can help you with. Not the point of these not the point of this practice. If it helps you for that, go for it. So if you can hold that state, so sometimes in psychedelics this is referred to as the liminal space. If you can hold that state, and y'all may know what I'm talking about, where to me it feels almost like surfing on top of a wave, where I know that the wave is going to crash eventually. There's no way to hold it forever. But you just try to hold it as long as you can. And the really tricky thing is that if you hold it, it'll crash. But in order to hold it for a long time, you have to ride it. So you just ride and ride and ride and ride. And if you can ride for about an hour, then you'll see what'll happen. So sometimes people have different kinds of experiences. Sometimes you get frightened. Sometimes you have body numbness. Sometimes any kinds of those things will bring your body shockingly back, which is totally fine. Don't force it, right? So go slow, practice for a while. If you can work your way up to being still for an hour, then your chances are going to go up. My body was numb, that means that you're probably doing it right. Right? So what's going to happen is that most of the time our attention is anchored in our body or our mind. So we don't really think about attention as a separate thing because it's always caught up with the body and the mind. So if you observe your thoughts, your attention is outside of your mind, right? Because you're looking at your mind. Most of the time when we're caught up with our thoughts, our attention is caught up with our mind. Same is true of our body. Where I feel tightness here, I feel something I feel hungry, so then my attention is caught up in the hunger. So when the body goes numb, if you can tolerate that numbness for a while, which is hard to tolerate, right? If you really think about it. Yeah, so it's easy corner saying numbness is not pleasant. It isn't. So it's a weird sensation. You just have to tolerate it for a while. Don't force yourself. So if it feels really uncomfortable, stop. Graduate yourself to tolerating numbness. And then what'll happen is hopefully your thoughts will stop too, and then what you'll be able to do is float. Right? Now, it's very possible that scientifically there's no such thing as astral travel or anything like that. And simply numbness, right? Like the presence of numbness may create some of these kinds of experiences. Like that makes sense to me from a neuroscientific perspective. That just extinguishing all of the sensory inputs of the body then makes your presence feel separate from the body. And then you've created an out-of-body experience. Do you think that this could be the cause of the placebo effect, since there are a lot of instructions that are directed throughout the meditation could be self-fulfilling prophecy? Sure, but let's remember that the placebo effect is not false. The placebo effect is real physiologically, right? So like, even if I take like a placebo, antipyretic medication, my temperature can actually go down. So in my experience, actually the opposite is true, that the more that you prime someone, the harder it is. So in my experience of meditation, especially spiritual experiences in meditation, expectation has the opposite result. Rather than tricking someone, so that's the other thing, is that it can make someone think that they had the experience, but it doesn't actually cultivate the experience. So if you had to ask me, I think that placebo actually has a negative experience, because placebo is expectation in the mind. And expectation in the mind is not going to facilitate experience. In fact, it's going to do the opposite. So what if people are highly suggestible? Suggestible is of the mind, right? Their thoughts are able to be influenced. This is not of the mind. Why did you start laughing when you had the floaty sensation? I don't know why you started laughing, but the laughing is going to take away the floaty sensation, right? So what you've got to learn how to do is ride it. Do the old meditation people ever talk about lucid dreaming? No. So lucid dreaming, I think, is like a bastardization of the things that the old people talked about. Lucid dreaming is actually the very opposite of meditation. So lucid dreaming is the attempt to use your imagination or thought to create experience, where I think, anyway, that's my understanding of lucid dreaming. I could be wrong there, but I think it's actually moving in the opposite direction. It shares some states with some of the consciousness stuff that you get, but there's a certain falseness to lucid dreaming that I think is different from Brahman. So I think there's shared consciousness states between lucid dreaming and meditation. It's hard to describe this stuff, but I think meditation goes beyond lucid dreaming. Yeah, so we tried this, right? So this is definitely on the less scientific side of what we do. But if we want to be honest to some of the traditions that have given us so much benefit, right, I think it's important not to forget these things. And at the end of the day, we can talk about it, you can read about it, but there's going to be no substitute for experience. That's what you should do it yourself, then decide. So I think this is the big shortcoming that I see nowadays, is that everyone's making decisions without having done anything, right? So you'll have a neuroscientist who says that this is false, it's all an illusion of the brain. Which could be true from a scientific perspective, but they've never experienced it, right? So once you experience something like this, that's what was really shocking for me, is that being a skeptic, relying on science, it's hard when there's no scientific explanation for something, but something has happened to you. Then what do you do with that? Right? It's challenging. So for people who are saying it doesn't compare to DMT, I have no idea. But a reminder that this practice takes time and effort. So I would say that, like I said, you need to be able to maintain that state for the better part of an hour before you really should expect anything. That's the minimum. So I would be highly skeptical of anyone who had any kind of experience with this practice today. It's just the introduction. You just need to do this for an hour. Then you do that for a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months, and then something may happen. So I would suggest that I would guess maybe about 90 hours of this practice is the minimum that is required for any kind of, to even have a 5% chance of some kind of spiritual experience. So do you think, this is a good question, do you think if I'm convinced that this isn't real or going to work out, but I still go through the steps, it can hinder effects or benefits? And if so, how do I overcome that? What you think is actually completely irrelevant. Okay? So this is important to understand. This practice does not work unless you can transcend mind. So expectations and what you think is going to happen is all within the mind. So you're going to have to shut off your mind anyway. The only problem that you're going to run into with the mind is that the mind won't let you do the practice. So your mind will say things like, this is a waste of time, don't bother. And then you'll stop doing it. But what you think is actually completely irrelevant. Like, this is not going to matter. Because the whole practice will move you beyond mind to begin with. That's what I love about meditation. You don't have to believe in it. Right? You just do it. Like, that's the cool thing about experiences. Like, whether you believe the water is hot or it's cold, you jump in, you're going to know. Like, you can believe whatever the hell you want to. It doesn't make a difference. Once you're in the water, you know exactly what the water is. What you think and expect is irrelevant. Right? That's what's so cool about meditation. That's why I teach it. Because if you do the practice, that's why we don't go into there's a ton of theory on meditation. Like there's, books and books and books and books. You guys can't see my bookshelf from here, but I probably have 100 books about meditation that talk about all these weird kind of theories. We steer clear of that stuff because generally speaking, it's not scientifically supported. So we try to steer clear of a lot of that weird, complicated theory, but that's why I just do it. Experience is going to be the ultimate thing. Oh, do you like tacos? Do you not like tacos? Try one. You'll know. It's that simple. Who are we rating? Who's around? I guess you could call it like an astral travel meditation or something like that. Moxie? Sunkier? Who are these people? Small streamer? Tiny little streamer? Little baby streamer? Let's see. Lulu Lovely. Let's see. Twitch.com Lulu Lovely is not a thing. Okay, I couldn't. Space Lion. We're gonna raid Moxie or having trouble. Am I lagging or what's? Oh, there's a comma instead of a period. Looks like. GG. GG. Okay, we'll raid Space Line. They're playing Lost Ark and they're doing PvP. GG. Maybe they can teach me how to play Lost Ark. Carry my ass through. Oh yeah, Taro. We could talk about Taro. There's a lot of interesting stuff. So the interesting thing is that there's actually some good scientific, we have some good scientific theories about how and why that stuff works. It's essentially projective tests, but interesting. We'll see. We can go more off the rails if y'all want. Y'all tell me. We can talk. So look, I don't know if I really explained this to y'all, but so I went to India for the first time in 2003 and started medical school for the first time in 2010. So for 7 years, I was exploring all kinds of weird stuff, man. I went and studied with homeopaths. I went and became a crystal healer and all this crap. And then I went to medical school. I think a lot of that stuff is neat, interesting, fascinating. A lot of it's BS. I tried everything under the sun, man, basically. Well, except for drugs. So I guess that's a pretty big thing that I missed out. But even then, there's a sect of spirituality that I was considering joining that has substance use as a central part of it. But,
then I decided to do something a little bit more legitimate for a good reason. You know, astrology, sure. So I've worked with a couple of really good astrologers. Very good. Okay, we got to go though. Send Spaceline some love.